gentlemen talk, they're going to give you examples about what works for them, what didn't work for them, but just, really internalize that and think about it as you go. So the last thing I want to do for an introduction is to tack on to what Rick was talking about with Dr. Christine Jones. She's a person that I've just had the pleasure to work with and to learn from, and she talks about what is called a quorum sensing. And so her definition of a quorum sensing is making sure that you have all of the organisms, all of the soil dwellers, all of the things that need to happen in the soil functioning, all kinds in order to see progress. And I really equate the work that I get to do with GPR and with this group and with Continuum Ag to the same quorum sensing of people. We've got all kinds here coming from a lot of different perspectives and looking at it through a systems approach. So I think that's what we're going to hear about today, and let's get started with the questions. And like Mitchell asked, I've got the website up here, so I do see your questions. Feel free to submit them as we go. But let's just kick things off here. We talk a lot about our whys, and I think you can Google anybody on this panel and learn about their whys. I am passionate about action, okay? So I want to know, what is it that you did? So for the first question of the panel, I would like for each of you to give us a brief introduction, a little something about yourself, and let's talk about what was the first action that led you down this path.
Okay, so I'll start off with this. And Mitchell and I, when we started on this, we're starting kind of at the ground level, nowhere near as advanced as where these guys are at and where they're taking this to. But I think there's a lot of farmers that want to hear, how do I get going on this? But really our journey started June of 2015, May of 2015, actually. Mitchell had an internship up in Minnesota. He called me and said, I'm going to be their soil health expert. And when he came home a few weeks later, he had all this, he was telling me saw cover crops seeded into some fields in June. And I'm like, that's kind of crazy. And then he had this information called the Haney soil health test. I'm like, well, what is that? And in 2015, it was, what is that? And what is soil health? And that was the time, if you recall back, when you started seeing things in farm magazines, that's when it started. That summer is when I started seeing articles, and every magazine since has something about soil health, and a lot of magazines now have special sections on soil health. But anyhow, at that time, we were looking at the data, and we had these, Mitchell was trying to help with his internship, sort through the data that comes out of it. There's a tremendous amount of information in this. How do you make it work? So he had put together this spreadsheet, and that's kind of where his software piece started, was a simple Excel spreadsheet to show a grower, this is what's going on in your field. And as you do this year after year, we can compare it by putting them side by side on the spreadsheet, which ultimately has led to his software. Where we're at with that, and I'll hit on that in just a second. But in the meantime, we were also starting to adopt cover crops on our farm. And we started that in 2015, maybe done a little bit prior to that, but not very much. Pushed locally here, and those that are local realize, but those that were not local here in Washington realize that there is a lot of cover crops in Washington County. A lot of cereal rye planted, and it's due to a lot of work by our local soil conservation county committee people, our local NRCS office, that really have pushed the incentives for us to be the #1 county in the state of Iowa as far as cover crop acres planted. So we started doing that and have been monitoring with the help of the Haney soil health test. And we do a lot of testing. In certain fields, we test weekly, same locations, testing cover crop versus no cover crop strips. And I only have, and if you go to our farm later, you can see the 4 60-foot wide strips of no cover crop. It's the only areas left on the farm that have not been cover crop, and they have never been cover crop, right beside 5 years continuous. And we've got that data, and that's what we want to talk about a little bit later, but the data is being tracked on the topsoil tool to show us what's going on with nutrient availability, soil biology, and everything. So that's kind of where we're at and what we've gotten to, and we are actually seeing big results in the last few years, and seeing really important trends as to what is really driving soil and plant nutrition.
Yeah, so I like that because you lean right into our next speaker, Dr. Rick Haney. But just to So you're saying that the next generation kind of brought you this idea. The next generation kind of fueled the action. All right, take it away, Rick.
So I'll tell you a fun little story. About 2 weeks ago, I gave my last webinar for USDA. I work for USDA ARS, and I retired at the end of this month. So I ended up being at the farmer that I used to work for back when I was 18 years old. I gave it from his house. So that's where I got interested in agriculture. And I was sitting in his house giving a webinar to worldwide about the stuff that we developed and our passion about how soil works. Now, to be fair, I plowed my share of soil, put out anhydrous, did it all wrong. So I know how to do that. But my passion, as corny as it sounds, is I watch those guys I work for struggle to make money every year. Borrow $1 million, to plant something or buy something that could die. And I just don't know how they did it. And so my job was to go to graduate school and try to learn what could I do to help them. And that's where the test was really developed. That's where it came from. Now, you guys will like this because those farmers I used to work for, they don't use my test. You know why? They had somebody ask me to say, well, we grew up with him. He's an idiot. Yes. But then they finally started using it, at 30 years later, they're like, my God, this really works. So that's my journey. It's come full circle, going to retire. And I thought, man, here we are, I'm almost done. But I have 7 and 11-year-old girls. So my journey's not over. So I'm going to keep going in the private sector. It'll be who knows what, but I sure appreciate all of you being here and interested, because the reality is the future is our soil and how it hits so many more levels than it's just the soil. It's the soil, it's us, it's our lifestyle, it's our mentality, bringing communities back together, and all those things are really, really important going forward, because we're so disconnected with, our phones. But I know this because of my 7 and 11 year.
So if everybody can tell, I don't talk like y'all. I'm Russell Hendrick. I'm a first-generation farmer. I was a career fireman for a while. I was always interested in agriculture. So 2012, decided to start farming. We rented our first 30 acres and planted a corn crop. But before I got into that, I went around to farmers in our area, asked them what I needed to farm with. They said, 150 horsepower tractor, 20-foot disc. Luckily, we were so broke we couldn't afford it, and there was this cheap thing called a coulter that you could put on a planter and no-till. And I happened to go by the NRCS office, and they showed me a video. If you haven't seen it, it's been out a while, but it's called Undercover Farmers, and it really showcased farmers in North Carolina, pretty much all the way up into North Dakota, South Dakota, Gabe Brown, Jay Fuhrer up at the Minokan farm. And it kind of showed me a different way to farm. So I think it's been a little easier for me to make the transition, because I knew absolutely nothing about farming. So I didn't have to unlearn, how other generations had done it before me. And it wasn't as crazy to me to try something new. And so we started out with just cover crops for an erosion and a weed issue, winter weeds we were trying to control. And I heard Mitchell make a statement the other day on the podcast. He said that, typically when farmers look at, soil health principles, it's kind of a defense. We're trying to, prevent erosion, prevent nutrient loss. And really it's a good offensive tool to where we can, build soil aggregation, increase infiltration. I would say the one shining moment in our farming is when I got introduced to Rick Haney. I had been using a standard Melic 3. I go down to Texas, I meet Rick, and the first thing he said, he's like, they use a very caustic acid when they do that test. What does your farm see? And my farm sees rain and the root exudates that he uses in his test. So over 4 years, we started implementing the Haney test on our farm, and our lead corn person at NC State University, I'll talk about it because they went to a meeting and he called me out by name and said the way that I farm would never be profitable. It would never yield well. I didn't need a fancy test like Rick's. I could just use what the state's been doing for 30 years. And so that year they had to give me an award for the highest corn yield in North Carolina and the second highest soybean yield. I've never smiled so much in my life. you know, they didn't even tell us that we had won to come to the meeting. I was actually speaking at a conference up in Maryland and drove all through the night to make sure I was there, that they had to give me that award. So I hope he sees this video and knows that he was wrong once again.
Hi, I've already talked, obviously. I'm going to go ahead and just make it unanimous on plugging this guy at the end of the table down here. I can't thank you enough for having the fortitude and the insight to come up with a test that makes total sense. I'm sure it took you weeks, years, months. I don't know what it was. I'm sure it just didn't happen overnight, but you've changed this industry, and thank you so much.
You guys are making me emotional, Mike. But I want to say this, and thank you very much for saying that. But this is not my test. This is nature's test. My job was to try to mimic nature in the field, because all the lab tests we've been doing up until now is like, let's get the soil in the lab and beat it up, whatever we think we should do. This is a more a test that asks your soil what we can do to help it. So this is more of a nature-based test. So, you know, I like to take credit for it, but you know, this system's been designed long before I showed up.
I mentioned earlier in my presentation about my thoughts on the carbon market, and I mentioned that we need a soil health score. Guess what? Rick's test gives you a soil health score, so maybe that's a nice place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this is a couple key points that I'm taking away from this is taking a look at nature's image, and two of you said this. What is my farm telling me? You know, that's so impactful. And then another thought is, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got, right? So one thing that this passion that I think a lot of us share is this change, this percent change. And you know, Rick has gone all in. This is the way that Russell started. Brian was eased into it, you know, and then dove head first, and then we got, you know, Rick here. But let's talk a little bit about what does this look like for scaling? And I get involved in a lot of regenerative conversations with companies, with organizations, and it's the buzzword right now, right? And I think that those folks that are not necessarily on the boots farmers, think that this is a much wider adopted practice of looking at soil health and regenerative. And I would say that it's a lot smaller than what we think, but the goal is scale. So let's talk about scale. And, you know, Rick, if you want to start, we'll move the microphone this way. What do we need to do to scale this movement?
Yeah. The most common question that I get asked after like the presentation I just gave is, who's going to support me when you get in your truck and drive home? So you need that group that's going to answer questions, help with anything they can. That's why this county like here is so awesome, because there are so many resources to go to talk to in this county. Right here, you don't have to go very far. Like I mentioned, in the state of Wisconsin, they've got over 40 groups that get together. That's what needs to happen. They're being led by the farmer. They understand. Farmers want to learn from other farmers. Nothing against academia, but honestly, a farmer wants to learn from another farmer. So that support network is very, very important. Teach the teachers.
So talking about scale, you know, like I said before, going into this, I didn't have any, I call them bad habits. I really had no idea what I was doing. And even though I believed in Haney and the Haney test, it took us 4 years to implement his soil test across our whole operation. You know, we did 25% each year. We still do a standard state soil test where I can compare what the state says versus what Rick says. And on average, you know, over 1,000 acres, if you look at just MP and K, we save anywhere between $80,000 to about $100,000 a year in fertility. You know, that's a large amount of money that we're not putting out there and risking for, waiting on rain if we're going to have a drought, a flood. And then also, just looking at the scale of cover crops, looking at 90% of our acres, we don't have to go back and make a second pass for any kind of chemicals. And to save $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year on chemicals, instead of riding a tractor all day, riding in a sprayer all day. A lot of us talk about quality of life. I can take my daughter and go on vacation to the mountains. I can drive to the beach. It really has cut back the amount of time that we have to actually be on the farm and doing work.
Two quick things on scaling that I will hit on. One on the testing, and then another on inputs and how that has made things affordable for us. But on the testing end of it, what we have done, and for years, I started grid sampling back in the early 90s, moved into 5.4 acre grids, moved to 2.5 acre grids for a number of years. And now with the help of Mitchell's tool and such, we're using zones, which are basically 10 acre zones throughout the field. And the tool, the topsoil tool, lays those zones out pretty much automatically for us. Yours would show up real quick, like if you log in and put fields into it. But we do that because, this test is more expensive. And the other thing we're trying to figure out is when's the best time to take that test. It depends on what results you're looking for, what information you're looking for. Am I trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to apply for my crop, or what do I need to have to report for my manure management plan? There's a difference. But we're trying to learn that, and by doing that weekly, we couldn't afford to do that with the cost of the test. Thanks to Rick for helping us, because we're trying to make this thing work. And also to those other products that we have tested, because there are a lot of new products on the market now that are there to improve plant health, soil health, whatever. And so we've worked to try to help generate more data for those companies, which has helped offset the cost for us, which it's just part of the equation. As far as also trying to save on some of the costs, Russell, you mentioned using the rye and using that as a weed control mechanism. And a lot of the growers in this area are starting to do more with letting the rye grow bigger. And as you get out north of town, you'll see a lot of ours. It's been sprayed with Roundup now. The heads are all on it. It just got sprayed, started spraying 2 weeks ago. And crazy situation. I was ready to get going the week prior. It was time to go, but it started raining. And not the best scenario for spraying Roundup, but I was spraying a quart of Roundup, straight Roundup on rye, and I was running my windshield wipers on the sprayer doing it because I could get in the field at that time. We just had some crazy weather. It killed it. 2 days later, you could tell exactly where I sprayed it. It was knocking it down. So things can work, but that on the cost effectiveness of that, I think most of my soybean acres this year will have some touch up. They're list beans. I'll outline some waterways and some field boundaries with some list, but most of the beans are going to have that 1 quart of Roundup on them for herbicide this year, and that's it. That's quite a change from when I was raising non-GMO beans 5-6 years ago and spending $53 an acre on herbicides. There's a tremendous amount of savings, and we've done some of the same things with the fertility. Not quite that extreme, but it's close. Overall, we've reduced our NP and K inputs by 45% on the farm over 5 years. And our soil test data is showing that our nutrient levels in the field are actually increasing. So our case study is all on the website, and you can see that information from the charts and such. But that's how we've been able to scale some by cutting costs and doing some trials and things like that.
My only scalability story is in 2012, I gave a talk in Omaha, Nebraska. And I got finished, this older gentleman, I'm old, but this guy was like 90, which I just loved. He was so awesome. And he stood up and goes, I ain't paying no $50 for a soil test, but I can get it done for $8. I said, well, yeah, you're right. I don't blame you. I said, well, that $8 soil test save you $30 an acre on inputs. And I said, if you're farming 100 acres, my math is right here, that would be $3,000, right? So I said, so you're not going to spend $50 to save $3,000? And he just he just stood there with his head down. He goes, well, I guess I'd be a damned idiot if I didn't now, wouldn't I? I dropped the mic. Yes, they never brought me back to that editor.
I got one more thing to add. Being a full-time fireman, sometimes we had off time. And the one thing I'll say is I was good at finding people's phone numbers that had no idea who I was. I called Rick Haney at the lab one day and said, hey, I'm Russell. I farm, I think at that time, maybe 200 acres. He spent 2 or 3 hours, talking to me about the biological indicators of the test, talking to me about, I'm trying to say this as nice as I can. He dumbed it down for me. And he taught me how to read his soil test. And then I started calling, people like Ray and Gabe, all kinds of people that had no idea who I was. And so I think that my part is to focus on a peer network. Find a farmer in your area that's already doing it. If you're here close, you've got the Hora family, or wherever you're at. And if not, find somebody who is experienced. There's a lot of good consultants that have traveled pretty much across the country, worked with a bunch of farmers. It would be great if there was a company that had a web-based platform, topsoil, that could essentially maybe put in there, different farms that they know that people could help other people, build a peer network where if you needed to be able to reach another farmer or a consultant to come to your farm, that they may have a list online, Mitchell Hora, and be able to actually, start providing a list of people so you can talk to another farmer. I have nothing against people that work in universities, but at the end of the day, they don't put the same money that I do out here and hope and pray for rain and that we have a good season. And if they don't have money on the line, they don't understand really the stresses that we go through as farmers.
I think that's great. And one thing I'll mention, just to reiterate what everybody said, is we're in person. I don't know how many in-person events you guys have done recently, but meet somebody, get their Twitter handle, get their Facebook handle, ask questions. I have always, I did not grow up in an agricultural family. I did, Kansas State University at college, but I had to learn a lot of stuff from scratch. So don't be afraid to ask a question that you think might be stupid. Just ask the question. I do that a lot. So I think that what's really important about scaling regen is having transparency and integrity. So I want to briefly ask you guys, answer this question briefly, and then we're going to get to the Q&A that's popping up here. I want to know what you tried that didn't work. Let's get real. Tell me about Rick talked about plan A, plan B, down to plan double Z. What did you try that was all the rage that you thought was, going to be good? What didn't work? What failed? Let's talk about some failures.
Yeah, I'll go first. So I married a woman when I was 21 and divorced her at 24 and was single for 18 years. And I tried to stay single and I failed.
You should all know that Rick has the most amazing wife now, though. Bravo. More is not always better. So when we first started doing cover crops, we started with, I think it was like 20 to 30 pounds of rye in our mix. Good weed control, good nutrient cycling. Saw lots of good things, and I was like, 120, 180 pounds. We're going to do some check strips. This is going to look fantastic. And I think we made like 50 bushel corn. We didn't understand, carbon and nitrogen ratios. We've had failures where, we thought we were going to make really good crops, had great weed control, but we kind of tied the system up. So, one of our failures was, not understanding how cover crops work, how to make a blend and use those correctly to kind of balance out that carbon and nitrogen ratio. And then some other failures we had a farm one year. We let it go really late. We were going to plant some corn silage for a dairy farmer. The cereal rye was like 7 feet tall. We sprayed it with Roundup. Most of the time we use Gramoxone. And if you spray rye with Roundup, there's a point where it's green and it's good to plant through, and then there's a point where it's really dead and good to plant through. and anything in between that, our planter made beautiful round belts and carried them from one end of the field to the other. We didn't even try to scatter the residue out. We left it there. I was like, you know, if we bring some cows out here in the fall, if there's still some stuff here, maybe they'll eat it. But that stuff will just wrap on everything. And I really, if I had to stick a dynamite that day, I would have blown the equipment up and I probably wouldn't have been farming now. But, you know, just understand you will have failures. You'll have issues where you have to adjust your equipment a little bit, but it's definitely worth the time and the effort to put into it.
Yeah, these are all good answers. In the world that we are in now, I no longer have a chemical that can save me. So the first failure that I had was we planted rape or canola into a cocktail that you cannot mechanically terminate that. It absolutely swallowed the corn crop up and suffocated it. So it's a learning curve. When you move down these roads, like Russell just said, you've got to figure out what species are going to work in your certain operation. There is no recipe. None of us have an answer for everyone in this building. You have to find what's going to work for you. And we've given you, in my presentation and what you heard here today, we've saved a lot of you at least 4 years of grief, in my opinion, of some of the examples we've laid out. That's what's important about the information flow. We can speed everyone up and maybe not have them fall into those same pitfalls that we fell into. And, you know, we're not the first ones to do this. We've got Dave Brandt ahead of us. We've got Gabe Brown ahead of us. We've got all kinds of people ahead of us, and I'm going to not mention their name because I'm going to forget them, but this has been going on for a long time. It's just this regenerative movement is really gaining traction because it's starting to be linked and tied to climate or carbon. So if you're going to go into those carbon markets, you're going to have to learn to farm this way. So all the more reason to get started.
So as we've done numerous things in the farm, and Mitchell brings different ideas to me every year of trying different crops, different production systems. And we've done, we've tried the relay cropping, we've tried some double cropping, grazing, both wheat and rye. Actually, the first intention was a couple of years ago when we tried to do, we were going to relay crop wheat, planted it multiple times. Well, 2 years ago, we had rain for 6 weeks and we couldn't get in and plant as much wheat as we wanted to. So we ended up trying to double crop it. Harvested the wheat off and then planted beans July 3rd, didn't rain until like the third week of August. They didn't yield very well. But we've gone on and this year, I don't know, so far it looks pretty good. We were going to relay crop 30 acres of rye. Beans were planted like the 23rd of April. They look really good. Because of all the rain we had a few weeks ago, we now have 85 acres of relay crop rye because it looked too good to go in there and spray it. Like, it was too muddy to even get in and make a mess of it. So a year ago, as we had the failure 2 years ago, a year ago, we had huge success with it. And if you come to the farm, you'll be able to see some of the fields where we've got the rye growing, we've got rape growing, and some of the rape and rye together, kind of by default, but that's okay. We're going to harvest it and use it anyway for our own purposes. But a year ago, that relay crop rye was only 3/4 of a bushel difference in the bean yield was only 3/4 of a bushel difference in the rest of the field where it was terminated early. So if you can raise 68 bushel beans and 35 bushel rye on the same field with one pass of herbicide, you can make some money on it. So some of those failures have turned into some success stories, and so we just keep trying and realize that, yeah, you're going to have some small failures along the way and small setbacks, but keep trying because there's a way to make these things work.
Yeah, that leads us right into Ryan H. asked the question on the website here, and keep asking them. Has your use of cover crops or regenerative practices changed your crop insurance APH prevent plan? So if just one of you wants to grab that question, if you've noticed any changes, what do you think?
On our crop insurance, we're doing very minimal. Next next year it may not be at all. This year is basically just to get enough in case we had to replant. And with all the wet spring, the frost and everything, we have not had a problem with any of that. A lot of stuff was protected under the cover crop. Corn and beans is the plant green. Might be down to a little bit of nothing. I'm not certain how these new $5 an acre cost shares pay. If you don't actually buy crop insurance, you probably don't pay. So be my guess. But we're not finding need because we're seeing yield stability. And it's just, we don't see those low end numbers anymore. The one thing that we do know that can hurt us, and it has in the past, and it bailed me out of one of my failures, which was looking to be a failure, was hail. Because when hail comes, it could get you. So that is one you have to be worried about.
Yeah, I'm on year 3 of no multi-peril insurance. I've no longer signed up for any government programs, and I took no CFAP payments in 2020. So it could be done. Thank you.
All right, getting some really good questions here. Arlen asks, how do you explain that yield drag in corn planted into green rye tending to increase in lighter poor soils? Can we mimic practices being used in Washington County and will consistently get 15 to 30 bushel drag? We are also nearly the lowest corn yield in county in Iowa. So talking a little bit about the yield drag planting into green rye.
Yeah, I'll hit that a little bit. Well, there's numerous ways of doing things, and as we're planting into rye, we actually have on our farm, we have found that it works really good in this transition period because we're not anywhere near where these two guys are planting cover crops. And I think this is where this guy is trying to get started with this. We have found that wheat is really good just as a starter, a little less risky. Cost of putting stuff in the fall is about the same. But wheat grows a lot slower in the spring. So we can let it grow a little bit longer and terminate, 3 to 5 days after planting. And those that want to do strip till this year on our farm, we actually just used a simple 12 knife anhydrous applicator with mold knives on it. It was probably more aggressive than I would like it to be, but boy, it made a really nice seed bed this spring. And I'm still using it in fall applied anhydrous, and the situation is working out okay for us, but we're probably going to continue to move away from that at this stage. But that seed bed is getting better every year. It's taken several years though to get the aggregation, the soil biology. If you go to the farm, I really encourage you to walk out into the field. We're watching residue physically move in the field. It's a lot of it's piled in small piles now where every night the worms are moving this stuff. It's an amazing thing to see. After years and years of no-till and seeing other neighbors and such no-till, that doesn't happen without cover crops. But the cover crops are really making it go. But yeah, there's a way of doing it. It takes time. Strip till it if you have to. It's a good starting place.
So to kind of add to that, I think the biggest thing as farmers is we have to understand how nature works. And one of the things that we use on our farm with Rick's test is the biological indicators. There's a CO2 burst that we can actually see the microbial activity as they're breaking residue down, and they release that into CO2. And the other thing is the carbon to nitrogen ratio. When I was talking earlier about our failures, and I said we planted 30 pounds of rye and had great success. We planted 120 pounds of rye and had a massive failure in corn. Nature has balance. And so if you can understand that soil has a carbon to nitrogen ratio, the biology in the ground has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you go out there and put way too much rye, you're taking every bit of nitrogen, organic and inorganic, and you're tying it up in the residue. And once you start getting so high in the carbon to nitrogen ratio, it may be 12, even 18 months until you're starting to see that breakdown from biology. So that's kind of how I'm sure maybe how Rick does it as well, but we balance our carbon to nitrogen ratios in our cover crop mixes by adding legumes. Crimson clover, vetch, winter peas, anything with a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio will actually take up and supply nitrogen as well to that soil profile. So when the biology breaks down that cover crop, it needs a couple forms of nitrogen, a couple forms of carbon. And if you lock that system up, it really can affect our yields.
So I got to ask this question a while back about yield drag, because we get this a lot. Like if you're traditional till and you've been doing it this way, and then you decide to go no till, start using cover crops. Is there a yield drag? And everybody's like, yes. And the question is why? The answer is, think about what you've been doing. You've been farming your farm you actually been farming microorganisms. So you got a certain group that reacts under the system that you're using. And when you switch that system, it takes a while for those microorganisms to show up and start doing their work. And nature is not on a yearly timeline basis like we'd like it to be. So you make money every year, but it has its own time. But that's why there's a yield drag, and that's that transition is you're bringing in a new group of microorganisms to your soil based on starting to plant cover crops and getting the first. And so just kind of expect that, plan for it, and be patient.
I'll add just a little bit of that, and then I'll go back to the information that's on the website, the charts. When we've been using Rick's test, the first few years we were using that simple Slovita test, and it would go up to like 140 parts per million, I believe, on the color scale, and that's as far as it would go. A couple of years ago, and Mitchell working with Rick with your newer sensors, your what do I want to call them, infrared gas sensors. We realized that we're going a lot higher. So the information in the charts that we see, 1st of April, we're around 150 parts per million CO2 burst. This time of year, we are all of a sudden, right, end of May, early June is when we see the rapid increase. And it makes sense. We got moisture, we've got a food supply, and we've got heat coming on. So the microbes are going crazy on the surface right now. And they're going to continue to increase through the month of June. We're going to get up over 400 parts per million on our farm in the stuff that we're at, which before they start to decline. There's some other growers in this room, they have fields that will go well over 700 this month. So right now is the time that I do not want to touch the field, because if I disturb their breeding process, their reproduction process, I'm going to slow them down, and they're what's kicking all my nutrients loose right now to my crop. So a few years into this, now we don't see that carbon penalty. I don't see the streaking. We don't see the yellow spots in the field. Even if I have residue pile from a spreader that's not working right, that just kind of starts disappearing on us. So the nutrients become available, leaving the microbes alone, leaving the soil alone, and learn that from the data. So you got the opportunity to look at that data if you want to see it. It's all shared on the website.
Thank you, guys. And I think we have just a few more minutes here. And one topic that, we're talking about having the data, using the topsoil. Okay, so you're doing that. So you're improving your soil health. You're producing a more nutrient-dense product. So what? Okay. We need new markets. And I think that the scaling of regenerative agriculture might be the development of new markets and kind of breaking down what we've always done. So specifically, Russell and Rick, give us, how do you break into these new markets? And as a producer, what do you need to be doing to be ready to execute a new market?
It's not asking much. Yeah, just put that out there. So going into new markets, we really have tried to do vertical integration on our operation. We started with introducing livestock to our farm, which at one point was a huge mistake. Ray Archuleta said I had to buy cows. So I bought springers. I thought that meant that they had the calves in the spring. Because actually I went to the fire department to work and it sprung over the fence in the highway. And then highway patrol called me. So we left that and went to stockers, and stockers were better. And then Ray's like, oh, buy sheep. So we bought sheep, and then we realized that when the wind blows, they die. And they wouldn't survive in Iowa. It's not near as windy in North Carolina, but they wouldn't make it here. So we got rid of sheep, and then we do pasture pork. And I sell most of our stuff on Facebook. We'll put that we're slaughtering pigs or cows, and Typically, we can sell everything on Facebook. You know, cost us absolutely nothing, but instead of getting, you know, 70, 80 cents a pound for a hog at a sale barn, we're averaging anywhere from about $5.50 to $9 a pound, which makes it a whole lot better to have it. You know, hogs are my favorite. We've got Berkshires. And then we started looking at stuff that other people weren't doing. We started growing, open pollinated corn, Reed's Yellow Dent, Bloody Butcher, Blue Hopi, and we ground it up into grits and cornmeal. That's a big thing in the South. And then we also started looking at, you know, our test weight on our corn is an average of 62 to 64 pounds. Our test weight is always really good. You know, my family used to make illegal alcohol. Now we partnered with a distillery. I didn't bring samples. Everybody always asks, but you know, we partnered with Foothills Distillery, and they make moonshine and several different bourbons and whiskeys out of our farm products. And there's other distilleries that we work with as well, even as far as, you know, up in Indiana. So it really was just calling people. If you can call somebody and explain to them and tell your story, that's the big thing, is be an advocate for your farm. You know, talk to them about how you're farming, what's different about it, and really explain your story well. It really does help with the bottom line. I mean, instead of getting, you know, $3.50 a bushel last fall, you know, most of our corn would have been between $6.50 to $10 a bushel if it was in, you know, regular form. And then if it goes into liquid, you know, bourbon sells pretty good well. You know, everybody likes to have a drink every now and then, most of us, but you know, start looking at those markets and start, you know, it does take a little bit of time, but give some responsibility to, you know, your kids on the operation, or, you know, if you can find somebody that's good with the internet, you know, start trying to build your marketing and do that as well.
Yeah, I'll have to piggyback on that. Vertical integration, we've got livestock on the farm. We're building fence all the time. We are rotationally grazing. I talked earlier in the presentation about regen. Another one that we do is cattle grazing. Then you plant your cover crop behind the cattle, getting ready for the next cash crop. We are getting ready to go online with natural meat sales. Companies like Purus, working with them, they're on the move with protein. You know, I always tell the story at home. Most of the farmers at home plant 2 crops, corn and soybeans, and we're up to 6. Do not let logistics get in the way. There's trucks, there's rail, things you can get creative, and just don't think that you need to be delivering 20 miles from home. We're taking soybeans 2 hours from home and corn an hour from home now. So sometimes you gotta move to where that market is. But then as this gains traction, Jess, and gets momentum going, more buyers are going to make it more available. There's going to be regional depots to bring this product to market.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that we talk about with Great Plains Regeneration is how do we build these new markets? We're doing a pilot project with Kansas, Oklahoma, and Nebraska wheat growers on some heirloom varieties with the goal to be able to take a product to market soon. So just a lot of pieces of the puzzle that we're trying to figure out. And I know a lot of you out here probably have some really great solutions for us at the same time. So, you know, just closing statements. I think that there's a lot that we are doing right now. If you had told me years ago when I met these folks that the stuff we're doing now is what we're doing, I'm blown away. It is advancing very rapidly, and there's more and more. You cannot Google regenerative agriculture without getting hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of hits. So the time is now. The resources are there or are almost there. This information is for everybody out there. Nobody owns regenerative, okay? And if somebody tells you they do, they're wrong. We own regenerative, and we're the ones that can work together, build the systems, and do something different. So with that, any other closing statements? With that, okay. Rick Clark.
Yeah, don't give up. Keep chipping away. Don't jeopardize the farm and just keep getting crazy. Because there is nothing that's too crazy anymore. It's just the world we live in now. So just keep plugging along.
I would say at least try one thing new a year that you fail at. We did 60-inch corn last year. For the first time, I worked with Lawrence Steinloggy here in Iowa, talked to Mitchell quite a bit about what they were doing. We had some success with it. We had some failures with it. We're trying new things, but don't bet the farm, but take a few acres, try something new, and try to figure out something that you could also bring to the farmers in your area as well, just like we've talked about today.
Yeah, it's a great point. We've tried a lot of different things, and they're not all successes. But if you don't try, you're not going to learn. And a lot of the equipment that we have can do a variety of things. And if you don't have the equipment, somebody near you does. So try something and see what works on your farm, and you can do it without making a huge investment.
All I would say is that it's been great to see all of you here, and don't be afraid to reach out, because don't be on your own island. There's people out there that will help you, want to help you for real, not just to make money. They actually want to help you do better. And I think everybody here knows what it's like to be on an island. It's pretty lonely, because 10 years, 12 years ago, we didn't think this deal was going to work, but here we are. And so community is so important. I bounced so many ideas off my wife Liz, and without her, I wouldn't have got where I'm at. And I know so many farmers that are afraid to reach out and talk to somebody else because they might feel like they look silly or dumb or ask a stupid question. It's like, come on, man. That's all I've ever done is ask dumb questions. That's how, So I'm going to leave you with this. I've been using uncommon sense my whole career. Use that.
All right, folks. Mitchell, thank you so much for having us all here. And last thing, let's regenerate, folks. Let's go do this. Thank you.